This is day 7 of the August 87 7-day retreat. Today, as we often do on the last day of a retreat, I will read some selections from the writing of Wang Po and from talks and writing of Krishnamurti. Selections from Wang Po are taken from the Zen teaching of Wang Po, translated by John Blofeld. Wang Po was a Zen teacher of the 9th century who was very explicit and simple in talking about what he needed to talk about. He did not just resort to short or what seems enigmatic phrases. The talks and dialogues were written down by his disciple, Pe Su, who was a scholar, a Buddhist scholar, and also a high government official. As you will notice, the essence of Wang Po's teaching is to get rid of, eliminate, cut off conceptual thought. He does not concern himself with wondering about what thought is, where it comes from, and observing thought, becoming aware of the whole process of thought. That is not anywhere in his teaching that I have found. The writings that are read here are not as they proceed in a book. There are many words that are words, sentences, or paragraphs that are eliminated for the sake of what we want to express here clearly and for the sake of clear understanding. He uses many Buddhist terms, being a part of the Buddhist tradition. The word Dharma is used often and is translated either as the teaching or teaching of truth. It's when it's spelled with a large D. When it's spelled with a small d, it means just phenomena, trying to avoid the Sanskrit terms. The word Buddha, either referring to Gautama Buddha or to the Sanskrit word which means absolute truth or enlightenment or an enlightened being. Sometimes the word is translated, sometimes kept. These books are not brought in, these readings are not brought in on the last day to provide sort of an ultimate authority. People sometimes have asked me this in the past. Are Wang Po and Krishnamurti your ultimate authorities? There is no ultimate authority in religious inquiry. There's only insight and seeing, the truth of seeing for oneself. Since all these materials come from copyrighted books, the tape of this talk will not be for sale. If you wish to take home tapes from other days, please consult the bulletin board. At one time, Wang Po says, our original true nature is, in highest truth, devoid of any atom of objectivity. It is void, omnipresent, silent, pure. It is glorious and mysterious, peaceful joy. And that is all. Enter deeply into it by awakening to it yourself. That which is before you is it. in all its fullness, utterly complete. There is naught beside. Even if you go through all the stages of progress towards Buddhahood, one by one, when at last in a single flash you attain full realization, you will only be realizing that which has been with you all the time, and by all the foregoing stages you will have added to it nothing at all. You will come to look upon those eons of work and achievement as no better than unreal actions performed in a dream. That's why the Buddha said, I truly attained nothing from complete unexcelled enlightenment. At another time he says, as to performing the 6 pious practices, the translation of paramitas, and these pious practices are charity, morality, patience under affliction, zealous application, right control of the mind, application of the highest wisdom. As to performing these 6 practices and vast number of similar practices, or gaining merits as countless as the sands of the Ganges, since you're fundamentally complete in every respect, you should not try to supplement that perfection by such meaningless practices. When there's occasion for them, perform them. When the occasion is past, remain quiescent. If you're absolutely clear that the mind is the truth, or the Buddha, truth meaning the word Buddha here, and if you're attached to forms, practices, and meritorious performances, your way of thinking is false and quite incompatible with the way. The mind is the truth, and there is no other truth in any other mind. It is bright and spotless as the void, having no form or appearance whatever. To make use of your minds, to think conceptually, is to leave the substance and attach yourself to forms. To practice the 6 paramitas, the 6 pious practices, and myriad similar practices with the intention of becoming a Buddha, thereby is to advance by stages. But the ever-existing truth is not a truth of stages. Only awake to the one mind, and there's nothing whatsoever to be attained. At one time, Pei Sui asked, what is the way, and how must it be followed? Many of us have heard this many times. But can one listen and look freshly? Not from memory and rote. What is the way and how must it be followed? There's a question as fresh as they come. So it makes no difference that it is 1,000 or who knows how many years old. It is still being asked, what is the way? How must I follow it? Wang Po says, what sort of thing do you suppose the way to be that you would wish to follow it? And the questioner asks, what instructions have the masters everywhere given for meditation practice and the study of the truth? And Wang Po says, words used to attract the dull of wit are not to be relied on. The questioner says, if those teachings were meant for the dull-witted, I have yet to hear what truth has been taught to those of really high capacity. And Wang Po says, if they are really people of high capacity, where could they find people to follow? If they seek from within themselves, they will find nothing tangible. How much less can they find a teaching worthy of their attention elsewhere? Do not look to what is called the teaching by preachers, for what sort of teaching could that be? And the questioner says, if that is so, should we not seek for anything at all? Wang Po, by conceding this, you would save yourself a lot of mental effort. Pei Su persists, but in this way, everything would be eliminated. There cannot just be nothing. Isn't it exactly the reasoning of this mind, no matter whether it's Chinese or 1,000 years old? Wang Po said, who called it nothing? Who was this fellow? But you wanted to seek for something. Pei Su says, since there is no need to seek, why do you also say that everything is not eliminated? Wang Po says, not to seek is to rest tranquil. Who told you to eliminate anything? Look at the void in front of your eyes. How can you produce it or eliminate it? Void here referring to seeing without making a thing out of anything, without knowing anything. Just seeing and not labeling, not reacting. That's what is referred to as the void. Void of the me who judges and knows and clings and rejects. Look at the void in front of your eyes. How can you produce it or eliminate it? The question says, do you mean that we should not form concepts as human beings normally do? And Wang Po says, I have not prevented you. But concepts are related to the senses, and when feeling takes place and concepts are formed, wisdom is shut out. Pei Su says, then should we avoid any feeling in relation to the truth? And Wang Po says, where no feeling arises, who can say that you are right? And Pei Su says, why do you speak as though I was mistaken in all the questions I have asked your reverence? And Wang Po says, you are a man who doesn't understand what is said to him. What is all this about being mistaken? Pei Su, up to now you have refuted everything which has been said. You have done nothing to point out the true teaching to us. And Wang Po says, in the true teaching there is no confusion, but you produce confusion by such questions. What sort of true teaching can you be seeking for? Questioner says, since the confusion arises from my questions, what will your reverence's answer be? Wang Po says, observe things as they are and don't pay attention to other people. There are some people just like mad dogs barking at everything that moves, even barking when the wind stirs among the grasses and leaves. And he goes on to say, regarding this doctrine, this Zen doctrine of ours, since it was first transmitted, it has never taught that men should seek for learning from or form concepts. seek for learning or form concepts. Studying the way is just a figure of speech. It is a method of arousing people's interest. In fact, the way is not something which can be studied. Study leads to the retention of concepts, and so the way is entirely misunderstood. Moreover, the way is not something especially existing. Truth is not located anywhere. The first step is to refrain from knowledge-based concepts. This implies that if you were to follow any empirical method to the utmost limit, on reaching that limit, you would still be unable to locate mind, which is here spelled with a capital M. The way is spiritual truth and was originally without name or title. It was only because people ignorantly sought for it empirically that someone appeared and taught them to eradicate this method of approach. Fearing that nobody would understand, they selected the name Way. It's Tao in Chinese. You must not allow this name to lead you into forming a mental concept of a road. At another time he says, hence all the teachings, all the practices, such as those purporting to lead to the attainment of enlightenment, possess no reality. The words of Gautama Buddha were intended merely as efficacious expedients for leading men out of the darkness of worse ignorance. It was as though one pretended yellow leaves were gold to stop the flow of a child's tears. Supreme knowledge is another name for the realization that there are no valid teachings. Once you understand this, of what use are such trifles to you? According harmoniously with the conditions of your present lives, you should go on as opportunities arise. And above all, you must avoid building up a fresh store of retribution for yourselves. Though others may talk of the way of the Buddhas as something to be reached by various pious practices and scripture study, you must have nothing to do with such ideas. A perception, sudden as blinking, that subject and object are one, will lead to a deeply mysterious, wordless understanding. And by this understanding, you will awake to the truth. When you happen upon someone who has no understanding, you must claim to know nothing. He may be delighted by his discovery of some way to enlightenment, yet if you allow yourselves to be persuaded by him, you will experience no delight at all, but suffer both sorrow and disappointment. Even if you do obtain from him some trifling method, it will only be a thought-constructed thing, having nothing to do with the truth. Truth is something never lost, even in moments of delusion, nor is it gained at the moment of enlightenment. It depends on nothing and is attached to nothing. It is all-pervading, spotless beauty. It is a jewel beyond all price. At another time he says, how is it possible that Gautama Buddha could have originated the present conceptions of enlightenment? But as these doctrines are still commonly taught, people become involved in the duality of longing for light and eschewing darkness, in their anxiety to seek enlightenment on the one hand and to escape from the passions and ignorance of corporal existence on the other. They conceive of an enlightened Buddha and unenlightened sentient beings as separate entities. Let me assure you again, the Buddha dwells not in light nor sentient beings in darkness, for the truth allows no such distinctions. Buddha is not mighty nor sentient beings feeble, for the truth allows no such distinctions. The Buddha is not enlightened nor sentient beings ignorant, for the truth allows no such distinctions. It is all because you take it upon yourself to talk explaining Zen. As soon as the mouth is opened, evils spring forth. And we can all attest to that. As soon as one says something, there is the opposite of what one has said, because our language and words and concepts come in opposites. And the mind perceives this way. If you say this isn't so, then that must therefore be true. Therefore you are endorsing that. So let us be aware of our categories of thinking. Another time he says, when a sudden flash of thought occurs in your mind, and you see it for a dream and an illusion, then you can enter into the state reached by the Buddhas of the past. Not that the Buddhas of the past really exist, or the Buddhas of the future have not yet come into existence. Above all, have no longing to become a future Buddha. Your sole concern should be, as thought succeeds thought, to avoid clinging to any of them. Nor may you entertain the least ambition to be a Buddha here and now. This is one of the great emphases of Zen teaching. A lot of people here are participating or have participated in this. This is why it is read time and again. But it is for you to find out the truth of this, not just follow some new words. Nor may you entertain the least ambition to be a Buddha here and now. Even if a Buddha arises, do not think of him as enlightened or deluded, good or evil. Hasten to rid yourself of any desire to cling to him. Cut him off in the twinkling of an eye. On no account seek to hold him fast, for 1,000 blocks could not stay him, nor 100,000 feet of rope bind him. It says later, consider the sunlight. You may say it is near, yet if you follow it from world to world, you will never catch it in your hands. Then you may describe it as far away, and lo, you will see it just before your eyes. Follow it, and behold, it escapes you. Run from it, and it follows you close. You can neither possess it, nor have done with it. From this example, you can understand how it is with the true nature of all things. And henceforth, there will be no need to grieve or to worry about such things. Of possessing or holding on to the truth. Another time he says, when a moment of understanding comes, do not think in terms of understanding, not understanding, or not understanding, for none of this is something to be grasped. The truth of thusness, when grasped, in quotation marks, the truth of thusness, or isness, when grasped, is grasped, but he who grasps it is no more conscious of having done so than someone ignorant of it is conscious of his failure. He says, until now so few people have come to understand this, so that it is written, in this world how few are they who lose their egos. And the last selection in this book, Pei Su says, but how can we prevent ourselves from falling into the error of making distinctions between this and that? And Wang Po says, by realizing that though you eat the whole day through, no single grain has passed your lips, and that a day's journey has not taken you a single step forward. Also by uniformly abstaining from such notions as self and other, do not permit the events of your daily lives to bind you, but never withdraw yourselves from them. Avoid the error of thinking in terms of past, present, and future. The past has gone, the present is a fleeting moment, and the future is yet to come. When you do meditation, sit in the proper position, stay perfectly tranquil, and do not permit the least movement of your minds to disturb you. This alone is what is called liberation. He says, be diligent, be diligent. This is an extract from a talk on meditation given by Krishnamurti at Zarnan on 29th of July 1973. It appears in Bulletin number 45 of 1982. And he says, meditation is the emptying of the mind of the activity of the self. And this cannot be done by any practice, any method, or by saying, tell me what to do. Therefore, if you're really interested in this, really concerned, you have to find out for yourself your own activity of the self, as the you in quotation marks. The habits, the verbal statements, the gestures, the deceptions, the guilt which you cultivate and hold on to, as though it was some precious thing instead of throwing it out. The punishments, all the activity of the self. And that demands awareness. Now, what is being aware? Awareness implies an observation in which there is no choice whatsoever. Just to observe without interpretation, translation, distortion, and that will not take place as long as there is an observer who is trying to be aware. So can you be aware, attentive, with that attention where there's only observation and no observer? Now listen to this. You have heard this statement, awareness is a state of mind in which the observer is not the observer with its choices. You hear that statement and you immediately want to put it into practice, into action. You say, what am I to do? How am I to be aware without the observer? So you want an immediate activity set going, right? And this means you have not really listened to that statement. You're more concerned with putting that statement into action rather than listening to it. It is like looking at a flower, smelling it. The flower is there, the beauty of it, the color, the loveliness of it. You look at it, you pick it, and you begin to tear it to pieces. And you do the same when you listen to the statement that in awareness, in attention, there is no observer. If the observer is there, you have the problem of choice, conflict, and all that follows. You hear that statement, and the immediate reaction of the mind is, how am I to do it? So you're more concerned with the action to be taken about that statement rather than actually listening to it. If you listen to it completely, then you're breathing the perfume, the truth of it. And the perfume, the truth, acts, not the me that is struggling to act rightly. So if you want to meditate, if you want to find out the beauty of meditation and the depth of it, you have to inquire into and understand the activities of the self, which is put together by time. Please listen to this. Do not do anything about it. Just listen. Find out if it is false or true. Just observe. Listen with your heart, not with your petty little mind. Time is movement, both physically and psychologically. Physically, to move from here to there takes time. Psychologically, the movement of time is to change what is into what should be. So thought, which is time, can never be still, because thought is movement. And this movement is part of the self. So, when one is aware of the movement of the self, in all its activities as ambition, fulfillment, in relationship and so on, out of that comes a mind that is still. Not thought is still. You understand the difference? The numerous people who have come to this speaker from every kind of group of meditation are always concerned with this problem, control and time. Most people are trying to control their thoughts, hoping thereby to bring quietness to the mind. But they don't see that thought is movement. You might divide that movement as the observer and the observed, or the thinker and the thought, or the controller and the controlled, but it is still a movement. Thought can never be still. If it is still, it dies. Therefore, it cannot afford to be still. So if you have gone into all this, into yourself deeply, then you will see that the mind becomes completely still, not enforced, not controlled, not hypnotized. It must be still, because it is only in that stillness that a totally new, unrecognizable thing can take place. These last selections are taken from Krishnamurti's notebook. I don't have the book here. Don't know the date and publisher. These were journals that he kept for less than a year, just wrote down things, and this is the pretty much unedited, unexpurgated rendition of it. I've left out a few paragraphs here and there. These notes were written in all the different places where he teaches or taught, and this one here happened in Italy. There's a huge, the year in the 60s, I believe it was in the 60s. There's a huge tall tree in the garden. It has an enormous trunk, and during the night its dry leaves were noisy in the autumnal wind. Every tree in the garden was alive, rustling, and winter was still far away. They were all whispering, shouting, and the wind was restless. But the tree dominated the garden. It towered over the 4-story house, and the river fed it. It was not one of those large rivers, sweeping and dangerous. Its life had been made famous, and it curves in and out in the valleys and enters the sea some distance away. There's always water in it, and there are fishermen hanging over the bridges and along its banks. In the night, the small waterfall complains a great deal, and its noise fills the air. The rustle of leaves, the waterfall, and the restless wind seem to be talking to each other a great deal. It was a lovely morning with a blue sky and a few clouds scattered about. There are 2 cypresses beyond all others that stand clear against the sky. Again, well after midnight, when the wind was noisy among the trees, meditation became a fierce explosion, destroying all the things of the brain. Every thought shapes every response and limits action. Action born of idea is non-action. Such non-action breeds conflict and sorrow. It was in the still moment of meditation that there was strength. Strength is not the many threads of will. Will is resistance, and the action of will breeds confusion and sorrow, within and without. Strength is not the opposite of weakness. All opposites contain their own contradiction. On the next day, it had begun to rain, and the sky was heavy with clouds. Before the sky was covered over entirely, immense clouds filled the horizon, and it was a marvelous thing to see them. They were so immense and peaceful. It was the peace of enormous power and strength. And the Tuscan hills were so close to them, waiting for their fury. It came during the night, shattering thunder and lightning that showed every leaf a quiver with the wind and life. It was a splendid night full of storm, life, and immensity. The body and the brain were very alert, listening to the rustle of leaves and seeing the dawn coming through the dark branches of tall, straight pine. It had great tenderness and beauty that was past and beyond all thought and emotion. It was there, and with it was benediction. Strength is not the opposite of weakness. All opposites breed further opposites. Strength is not an event of will, and will is action in contradiction. There is a strength that has no cause, that is not put together through multiple decisions. It is that strength that comes into being out of total aloneness. It is that strength which comes when all conflict and effort have completely ceased. It is there when all thought and feeling have come to an end and there is only seeing. It is there when ambition, greed, envy have come to an end without any compulsion. They wither away with understanding. There is that strength when love is death and death life. The essence of strength is humility. And on the next day, it had been raining all day. The roads were slushy, and there was more brown water in the river, and the slight fall of the river was making more noise. It was a still night, an invitation to the rains which never stopped till early this morning. And the sun suddenly came out, and towards the west the sky was blue, rain-washed and clear and clean, with those enormous clouds full of light and splendor. It was a beautiful morning, and looking to the west, with a sky so immensely blue, all thought and emotion disappeared, and the seeing was from emptiness. Before dawn, meditation was the immense opening into the unknown. Nothing can open the door save the complete ending of the known. Meditation is explosion in understanding. There's no understanding without self-knowing. Learning about the self is not accumulating knowledge about it. Gathering of knowledge prevents learning. Learning is not an additive process. Learning is from moment to moment, as is understanding. This total process of learning is explosion in meditation. And the next day, early this morning, the sky was without a cloud. The sun was coming up behind the Tuscan hills, gray with olive, with dark cypress. There were no shadows on the river, and the aspen leaves were still. A few birds that had not yet migrated were chattering, and the river seemed motionless. As the sun came up behind the river, it cast long shadows on the quiet water. But a gentle breeze was coming over the hills and through the valleys. It was among the leaves, setting them trembling and dancing with the morning sun on them. There were long and short shadows, fat ones and little ones, on the brown sparkling waters. A solitary chimney began to smoke, gray fumes carrying across the trees. It was a lovely morning, full of enchantment and beauty. There were so many shadows and so many leaves trembling. There was perfume in the air, and though it was an autumnal sun, there was the breath of spring. A small car was going up the hill, making an awful noise, but 1,000 shadows remained motionless. It was a lovely morning. And then later, the intense energy of life is always there, night and day. It is without friction, without direction, without choice and effort. It is there with such intensity that thought and feeling cannot capture it, to mold it according to their fancies, beliefs, experiences, and demands. It is there with such abundance that nothing can diminish it. But we try to use it, to give it direction, to capture it within the mold of our existence, and thereby twist it to conform to our pattern, experience, and knowledge. It is ambition, envy, greed that narrow down its energy, and so there is conflict and sorrow. The cruelty of ambition, personal or collective, distorts its intensity, causing hatred, antagonism, and conflict. Every action of envy perverts this energy, causing discontent, misery, fear. With fear there is guilt and anxiety, and the never-ending misery of comparison and imitation. It is this perverted energy that makes the priest and the general, the politician and the thief. This boundless energy made incomplete by our desire for permanency and security is the soil in which grow barren ideas, competition, cruelty, and war. It is the cause of everlasting conflict between man and man. When this is all put aside with ease and without effort, then only is there that intense energy which can only exist and flower in freedom. In freedom alone it causes no conflict and sorrow. Then alone it increases and has no end. It is life that has no beginning and no end. It is creation, which is love, destruction. Energy used in one direction leads to one thing, conflict and sorrow. energy that is the expression of total life, is bliss beyond measure. We will end here for today.